Hello, and welcome to Galactic Terrors for December 2022. Thank you all for joining us this evening for the reading series that scours the known universe for scary stories, strange tales, weird horror, dark humor, and all sorts of literary oddities from the most imaginative authors writing in a variety of fascinating genres. I am Jim Chambers, and with me is my co host, Carol Geisender.
Hello, everybody. I always think every time you say literary oddities, I feel like I'm being called out, Jim. So, yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes.
Exactly, right. I think, look, I mean, if I said literary banalities, I think we'd all sign off and go watch reruns or something. So I'd rather have the oddities.
Yes. Yes. Odd is good. Odd is fun. What
So,
else? What else are you going to do, huh?
yeah.
So, cool.
But can you believe it? It is December already. We were chatting about that last week when we realized December 1st had crept up on us, and we were trying to figure out where July through November went. It has been one heck of a roller coaster year for sure, and definitely moving at breakneck speed.
Yes. And we're not used to this after a few years of off time. And I was just saying, you know, boy, December's just been insane. And Jim's like, it's only the 8th, Carol. It's like, oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yes. That's like my kids laugh at me when I come home or I come out, up from work on a Tuesday and say, "Man, it's been a rough week."
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Well,
I,
but
I, I
tonight,
literally don't know what day it is most of the time.
well, today is December 8th, Thursday. It's Galactic Terrors Day, and we have a fantastic lineup of readers for you tonight. Joining us are Randy Dawn,
Mhm.
Todd Kiesling, Leanna Renee Hieber, and Andrea James. And we are so excited to have them join us. They have put together some great readings to share with you tonight, and they're ready to take your questions. So you feel free to put them on the spot with your literary inquiries, and we'll have some good conversations going later.
I've heard all these people read, and they're fabulous, and their work is wonderful. And I think this is a great way to end up 2022 for Galactic Terrors. So I'm very excited. Quite fun.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I see Nicholas in the chat, one of our biggest supporters. Nine watching, but four likes. Come on, folks. Hit that thumbs up button. Get into the giving Xmas spirit and show some love for GT. Thank you very much, Nicholas. And you're doing part of my job for me because I do have to say, if you're here for the first time, or even if you're here coming back to join us again, please like and subscribe. That way,
If
I'll
yes, for those
keep you.
who are watching on YouTube. Yeah.
Yes, on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah.
On Facebook, you can certainly like us. I guess you can't
Mhm.
subscribe on Facebook, but you can certainly subscribe to our Galactic Terrors YouTube channel, which is probably the best place to go anyway, because our entire archive of Galactic Terrors sessions are on the YouTube channel going back to when we kicked this off in September of 2020. So we are deep into year 3 of Galactic Terrors.
Mhm.
It's kind of like Star Trek. We have a 5-year mission to go boldly where no authors have gone before, I guess, and
Yeah.
or
I
something
I
like
have
that.
I have a secret project in mind that we should put together a very good chart that we can share of who read when, so that people have certain authors that they like, or they want to find new authors. I think that'd be pretty cool to put together. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
yeah. I think we'll have to collaborate on that because I've been
yeah.
envisioning some kind of crazy infographic.
If
Uh,
only we knew somebody who did a lot of graphics. Wait, Todd? Oh no, we'll talk to him later. Yeah.
that's it. So I think we are giving away at least one book tonight, correct, for our
Mhm.
newsletter subscribers. So we do have a Galactic Terrors newsletter, and I'm going to put the link up here so you can see that it where you can subscribe to that. The newsletter goes out twice a month. We don't spam you. We don't bug you. We don't try to sell you used cars. We just tell you every month who's reading, when they're reading, and send you a reminder. I think it's the day before or
Sometimes it's the same
thereabouts.
day, like 2 hours ago. Yes, but we send a reminder with the links. Yes.
Yes. So if you want to keep apprised of who's coming up and when we're going to be airing these readings, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter. And each month, we randomly select someone from the newsletter subscriber list to receive a book. And I think tonight, Carol, we are giving away.
Uh, Leanna and Andrea were kind enough to offer
Yeah.
a paperback copy of a book, and we have some other ones that are available as well. So we will that would be to the U.S. people whenever we do a paper.
Mhm.
So more news later about other books because we usually pull maybe 3 names, and it's very fun to share. So
Yes, we always have some good stuff to send to our audience.
yeah. Well, here we are in the month of December, which is the end of the year, and it's the time of year when lots of people who are authors are offering their works for award nominations. So that's going on within Horror Writers Association as well for horror and dark fiction works. And
Yeah, if you're an
Jimmy,
HWA member and you read something that really impressed you this year, or you saw a film that you thought was fantastic in the horror genre, please recommend that for the Bram Stoker Awards. You can do that by logging into the members only portion of the HWA website, horror.org, and clicking on the submit a recommendation button. It's a big red button. It's hard to miss. Fill out the form and let people know what you thought was great in 2022. Not only does it put works forward for awards consideration, but it contributes to really a great snapshot of horror for the year. So the recommended reading list is public facing, and you can go, a lot of readers go there and say, well, what did I miss in 2022? Or I need something to read. Let me go see what's on the list. We've heard from librarians who look at that list when making decisions about what horror books to stock in their libraries. So, even if a book or some other work that you enjoy doesn't make it to the Bram Stoker ballots, putting it on that list does help get the word out to others that this is something cool to check out.
And that's one other fun benefit if for folks who are writers or interested in horror, that's a benefit of being a member of Horror Writers Association, because you also get free copies of many books to read in the hopes that one might like to recommend them. So how do you turn down free books? Now, all right, but I have a question for you, Jim. In the holiday time, do you give books as presents, or do you ask for books as presents, or both, or neither?
I always ask for books, and only if somebody asks me. And I have a couple of family members who are always like, well, because my birthday comes in December too, so it's like sort of the double whammy. We're like, well, is there anything that you want? I'm like, well, there's always a few books.
Yeah.
That I can point to. I love to give books as gifts, but I do it judiciously because not everybody enjoys receiving a book as a holiday gift, or shares my taste in reading. So you've got to know your audience when you're giving books.
You mean grandma doesn't want the horror books? Wait a minute.
I think it wouldn't go over too well. But I think books make great presents, especially if you can get them autographed.
Yeah, that's a neat thing. And my family appreciates when I ask for certain books. I've been in a book group with the same group of women for 25 years. And so we try to choose our books for the next 6 months ahead of time so that everybody has something to ask for the holidays. And my family loves that because they're like, oh, thank goodness, we know what to get you.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, that's very cool.
All right. So what do you think? Shall we get started with our readings tonight?
I think that would be a lot of fun. You want to start us off with an introduction here?
Absolutely. So our first reader tonight is RANDEE DAWN. RANDEE is a Brooklyn-based entertainment journalist who scribbles about the glam world of entertainment by day, then spends her nights crafting wild worlds of fiction. Her debut novel, Tune In Tomorrow, about a fantastical TV reality show, published in August by Solaris. And she writes about the wacky world of show business for Variety, the Los Angeles Times, Emmy Magazine, and Today.com. And she is the co-author of The Law and Order Unofficial Companion. Find out more about RANDEE at randeedawn.com. Let's welcome RANDEE.
Hi, everybody. I love that introduction because Tune In Tomorrow is actually a humorous fantasy as opposed to one that would have blood dripping down. But, I know the room I'm in, so I appreciate that introduction. So I was going to read from Tune In Tomorrow, but then I realized it is December. We are in the holidays, or we are approaching them, and I have one of my very first sales was a story called Home for the Holidays that came out a bunch of years ago. You can get it through my website if you go to the URL right there and go to the books section and look up Home for the Holidays. It's a very slim volume of short stories, and this is the very first one in that book. So I'm going to read to you from that tonight. Home for the Holidays by RANDEE DAWN. Giles Sanderson was a very bad man, but Jesus, he was a hell of a decorator. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little here. Nathan Jacobs is the name, and this is my territory. Some call it a neighborhood, but when the houses are this damn huge and each comes with 3/4 of an acre of property, I start thinking of it as territory. I'm not alone. Folks around here mark their space better than dogs. Why, just take a turn onto our main drag off I-35 and you'll see them. 10-foot high wood slat fences with no space between even for a casual peep. Because Christ knows you shouldn't be eyeballing who's got Oprah on the tube, or who's throwing the ball with his kid, or even who's burying something under the old oak tree in the far back corner. Or in the case of Giles Sanderson, when you hauled off and backhanded your wife across the chops for not scurrying fast enough to get the mud clots off the Italian tiled floors. Mud that you, Giles, had clomped in the first place. You wouldn't want nobody to be seeing that. Yes, the backs of our territories are duly cut off from the rest of the world by the butt ugliest of fences. But the front of those houses, well, that's a different story. We're Delians, you see. That's the computer giant that employs us and sets us up in these fine McMansions, one cardboard cutout like the others, with just enough shades of difference in the rock facade or the hidden two-car garage or the overhanging porch to make it seem as though they were all thought up by original brains. But the truth is they all look the same, and when you're driving past, they're just a blur of beige and gray, like the dusty ground that used to surround Austin before the builders came and resettled the place. Dell employees don't stay too long in one place. They come, they unpack, they get settled, wave a little to locals, and then they're off again, relocated like army brats, only ruled by the whims of the computer industry. Houses in this area get to be 2-3 years old, and they've gone through just about as many families. There are no long-timers. Except us, the Jacobses, or Jacob '(S) if you're partial to misprinted nameplates like the one Jill bought me when we moved in. I've been here with her and the little ones, that's David and Astrid, going on 5 years now. I'm a Delian like the others, but I've got a snug little executive spot with a window overlooking I-35, but still overlooking. I know about half the folks who load in and load out of our little cul-de-sac. That's Tempest Cove to you. We wave and send over Jill's cranberry muffins when they arrive, and sometimes they wave back until they're waving goodbye a few months later. It happens. Giles Sanderson was never a Delian. He worked for one of those big box stores somewhere up in management with one of those titles that includes the word vice, and that's all I know about that. And it turned out his wife is allergic to cranberry. I still remember when they moved in about 4 years ago, right directly southwest to our homestead. Jill did her muffin thing, coming back to tell me that evening how the wife, never did get her name, stuck her head out of that front door like a mouse from its hidey hole, took the basket, and darted right back in. It was dark in there, Jill told me later, and they had the AC on full blast, so I felt like I was peeking into a cave. She also said the wife had on sunglasses. I put it out of my mind until our doorbell went that night. A big ho, 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 because I bought that ringer with 17 different rings that I like to randomize. It was getting on to October, which was the start of the big holiday season, so I made a mental note to switch to ghost noises. But on the other side of my front door was like a big no, no, no. Without preliminary or nothing, Giles Sanderson, face all aflame like he was going to stroke out, pushed my wife's basket into my arms. A chewed-on muffin rolled onto the floor. Sharky, our golden retriever, shot forward and had it before Dust could even think about gathering. That retriever is a garbage disposal, and no mistake. "Just what do you think you're doing with my wife?" Sanderson steamed at me. Behind me, I knew Jill was sticking her neck out of the kitchen. Such a loaded statement had to be seen to be believed. More importantly, what are you doing with my wife's basket? I tried to get things light. Folks in Texas, even near the civilized oasis of Austin, do love their firearms. Weirdly, it worked. The red went to pink and then to sort of a mottled orange gray. Sanderson wasn't a very big man with a flat top crew cut an aircraft could have landed on, and his clothes were just a cat's whisker from being too tight. I got the picture. Former jock, holding off middle age with both hands. Probably pumped iron 3 hours a day. Finally, when he realized I was kidding, he stuck out a meaty paw. Manicured fingernails glinted under our outside porch light. Sorry, overreacted. Just the wife's, she can't have berries. None. Blows her up like a balloon. No problem, I said and took his hand. He squeezed so I could feel the bones folding in. I'm not a small man myself, even if I never was a football player. But I know overcompensation when I see it, or feel it. This wasn't a handshake. This was a test. So I didn't wince, I just gave it back. And the handshake went on a few breaths longer than it should. A tap came on my shoulder and I let go. Jill came around and gave me a look warning about testosterone contests. Howdy, she said. Jill Jacobs. So sorry I caused a fuss. That Jill, she's a lady with the outside folks. Butter wouldn't melt and all. With me, though, she's a real person and swears like a sailor. Just one reason I love her. He turned red again, but this was a blush. Oh, sorry, ma'am. Giles Sanderson. He pronounced it with a soft G, and it rhymed with piles. I just bet he was the kind of guy who'd blast off if you pronounced it wrong. Nathan, I nodded his way. We just got in, and well, it's a little funny to have a welcome wagon, he admitted, running his paw around the back of his neck. Just never know who could come by and start offering food, so I got a little concerned. Jill passed me a look. We knew folks who got concerned like that. It never ended well. And in the neighborhood where I grew up in North Austin, it could end in blood, sweat, and tears, let's say. Suddenly the wife's sunglasses inside made sense. Disarmed, Sanderson stood there and babbled a little longer, told us what they were doing here and how they didn't have kids but were hoping, and then the phone rang and we both begged off. And when I shut the door finally, I think everybody was relieved. At least he won't be here long, I told Jill. How do you make that? She asked. Because nobody stays here long. Except us, she winked. Muffin? So that's how it started. We met the Sandersons one at a time, and that was it. They never waved back, so we didn't strike up a friendship. And I didn't have time, not that October, because I was getting geared up for one of my favorite things of all, dressing up the house. Yeah, it might seem a little candy-ass, but when you've got kids, you get into the whole cornball of everything. You sing with the Lion King and you act like Dora's a genius, and in a way you actually believe it because they do. So starting when the kids were about 2 and 3, I got into the holidays all over again. Halloween kicked the season off for me. Spook Day meant I could wire the house for sound and movement and make the lights flash and the witches fly and send up plumes of dry ice smoke and put the doorbell on and make it go woo. Every year there was more stuff at the store to test out. The skeleton I put in the front hallway, which lurched out at you when the door opened, scared off so many trick-or-treaters I had to retire it. But turning the garage into a haunted house brought them back. I reigned unquestioned supreme as Halloween House on Tempest Cove. Partly that was because of all the Jesus freaks around here. They got Halloween seen as anti-Christian. These evangelical nuts got all worked up over the fact that their favorite holidays might actually have, saints preserve us, where are my smelling salts, pagan histories. So the competition I might have isn't participating. Oh, sure, their kids go candy grubbing. Some of them even have the little ones show up with pamphlets. But they don't dress up and they don't decorate the house, and if they give you the hairy eyeball in the H&B if you start checking out the bowl with the mechanical hand that grabs back. So it didn't surprise me at all that Giles Sanderson's house was dark that first Halloween. I thought about egging it, but between the haunted house and taking Dave and Asti around the territory, I didn't have the time. And then we all crashed out after too many Reese's peanut butter cups, so I shrugged my shoulders and let it go. Then came Christmas. Now, Christmas, that's a different animal. The neighborhood goes certifiable. I shit you not. Every year we go for a post-meal Thanksgiving constitutional. I need a walk before all the pie and catch parents with their kids climbing trees and scaling ladders, already putting up the gaudy red and green lights or staking out those blow-up Santas and snowmen to flap in the breeze for a whole month. Every house, and I do mean every house, except the ones not occupied, has some kind of decoration up, from Santa and his sleigh to the roof on the roof to multiple trees in the window. Who needs more than one tree? And I think I have run out of time, so I will stop there. That is about part of the way through the story. And if you want to know how the story goes, because it gets ugly between Nathan and Giles, let's put it that way, you can pick up Home for the Holidays in on my webpage under books. And thank you guys for including me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I absolutely love some of your stories because they all start out sounding like, oh yeah, this is perfectly normal and everything is, and it's like, oh wait, what did they say? Oh, wait a minute, you know, like your story about the cat in the subway just totally slays me. Totally
Oh yeah,
slays me.
there's that.
So that's fun. So you write a variety of things. What is it like for you to write dark, creepy, horrible stuff? Because some of your stories have been very intense, and then more fun and entertaining things. How does that work in your brain?
I mean, I love stories that either have twist endings or indicate they're going in one direction and then, in a logical way, completely go in a different direction. I kind of like
Hmm.
taking the readers on that ride because those are my favorite stories. Whenever I've
Yeah.
read them, those are the ones that stick with me. So if I've done it right, then that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping that I am actually writing. Tune In Tomorrow was a little bit of a change because there's no trick ending or anything like that. But I do think there's a through line with the humor. I like stories that give you a
Mhm.
chuckle, even if it's a really dark chuckle. So
Yeah.
that's what this story does. That's what Home for the Holidays does.
Yes. And in Tune In Tomorrow, there are some dark moments,
Yes,
indeed. So that's quite
there are.
intriguing. But
Yeah,
there are some funny things. So that's
yeah.
cool. Yeah. Ay, ay, ay. So I have to be honest, I was kind of disappointed, but I was also delighted. I bought the Tune In Tomorrow book, but I listened to most of my things on audiobook. So I listened to it on audiobook, and the only thing that made me sad was that you were not the one reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the audio reader did a great job, but I remember hearing you read the dragon part, and that was very fun. So,
I'm not talented enough to do all those voices on a regular basis and then do it for 464 pages worth.
yes, yeah, it's a lot of fun. So, can you tell us about how your work affects what it is that you do for writing? I mean, you are involved with quite a few different things in the entertainment world.
Mhm.
How does that inform your idea of what to put in a story and such?
I have I seem to use it more in my long fiction, but the
Hmm.
entertainment industry is something that flavored my earliest books, which have not yet been published. That tended to be more the music industry.
Ah,
And for Tune In Tomorrow, I went into the backstage of the TV industry. I've written a lot
mhm.
about TV and film. And for those who don't know, Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans.
Mhm.
And it started out as being more of a soap opera, so it's kind of a soap opera reality show hybrid. But I used to work at a soap opera magazine, so I will not either, confirm nor deny that anybody in this book is inspired by somebody I may or may not have met while working on
Right.
TV
All
programs.
legal disclaimers, completely in place. Yes.
Exactly. But yeah, I like to say that I tried to put in, how the sausage gets made, what it's like to actually be working on a
Hmm.
TV show, and also maybe what it's not like because of the mythical creatures aspect. Um, so yeah, they talk a lot. The old phrase is write about what you know, and I think you need to immerse yourself in something enough to be able to pull it up organically, and that seemed to be what happened with the entertainment industry when I sat down to write Tune In
Hmm.
Tomorrow, and I'm working on a follow up as well that also does something similar.
Oh, now I'm excited. Yes. Okay. That's gonna be a lot of fun. Very cool. And how about when you go out in the world and you're talking to other people about your books? How does it work since you already have some networks? Does that uh,
Are you leading me in a certain direction? Because
well, I'm just so excited to see your book all over the place. So I would love to hear, your take on sharing it with the world.
well, I'm basically been shameless. This is my first novel. I basically will tell anybody about it at the drop of a hat, or even without the drop of a hat. I will talk about it to anybody. And I am fortunate enough to, as part of my job, do interviews with some names that you may have heard of.
Mhm.
And it occurred to me, oh, if you're going to talk to these people in person, maybe you should give them a copy of the book. So I can say that I personally put the book into the hands of Seth Meyers. I sold a copy to the guy who played Smith on Sex and the City. He came to one of the places where I was selling it, a convention where I was selling it, and so he has a copy. And then I interviewed Jamie Lee Curtis a couple of months ago. And when I was done with the interview, I said, "Do you mind if I give you a copy of the book?" And not only did I give her the copy of the book, she said she was happy to read it, and then she put it with a couple of other books on Instagram. So I mean,
Ooh.
use what you got, I guess. I'm like I say, I'm extremely fortunate that this is my job and I can get it in these people's hands.
Mhm.
Does that translate into sales? We'll never know. But it doesn't hurt to put it wherever you think somebody who has more following than you do might
Mhm.
actually mention it. And that's
Yeah.
so that's how I'm doing that.
And that's advice that I've heard as well for book marketing, to figure out what people would have an interest in this and put the book where they can find it. So that's exactly
Right.
what you're doing. Yeah, that's cool.
Exactly.
Well, we
Yeah.
have a question here from Megan. Who is your
Okay.
favorite character to write in Tune In Tomorrow?
Oh, Megan. Hi, Megan. Megan actually just wrote something very nice about the book. I think she just
Oh.
finished it the other day. So thank you again for that, Megan. Um, I mean, I'm with the main character Star the whole time, so I don't want to really say her just because I love her and she's great. But I think that when you're writing stories, characters sometimes rise up in ways that you weren't expecting them to. And there's an executive producer who is a faun, and his name is Jason. And there's a little I had a crush on a guy when I was in high school who very much reminds me of how Jason behaves, a little over the top, very well dressed. And writing Jason, I think I was channeling some of that. But I also know that from my readings, the security dragon named Phil seems to be an all-time favorite among people. And I feel like there's definitely short stories that could be written about how Phil the dragon, who has issues and goes to therapy, ended up as a security guard for a mythical reality TV show. So I think those two definitely stand out, and in surprising ways. I didn't expect that they were going to be such favorites of mine and others.
Mhm. That has to be a really, really big couch in the therapy office. That's all I can think of.
I think so. Yes, maybe they
Yeah.
go outdoors altogether.
And Megan agrees that those are two of her faves as well. So yeah,
Yes.
that's excellent. Now, when you're writing dark pieces,
Mhm.
what does that do for you to write something that's dark fiction or horror or whatever? How does that work for you, and what purpose does it serve in your creative bracket?
Right. So what's interesting is there is a connection between humor and horror, I think.
Mhm.
And it's not an obvious connection, but some of the things that I do with humor, I'm also trying to do with my horror. When I was writing Tune In Tomorrow, and I had to do another pass through on the draft, I remember coming to every single scene and going, "How can I make it funnier? Like, what could be wackier about this scene? Turn it up to 11," as they would say in Spinal Tap. When I was writing some of my horror stories, like there's a story that I have in Even in the Grave, that you co-edited, called Fetch. As I was going through that one, I kept on trying. I would go back through rewrites and think, how can I make this scarier, or how can I make this even more gory?
Yeah.
Because it felt like you needed to put that extra layer on there to really make it stand above just a plain old ghost story, or just a plain old scary story. So it was more, and at that time, I'm not thinking about the audience necessarily when I'm writing it initially, but later on, I do have kind of the audience in mind. Like, what can I do to provoke a reaction in the person who's going to read this? Can I go one step beyond what they think I'm going to do, and
Mhm.
then do it? So, so I feel like there's a quiet audience sitting around me for some of the revisions that I'm doing, and I'm thinking, how can I screw with you? And and that's kind of where it goes. So I think that both of those things are accurate for both different types of stories.
Excellent. Well, it worked because that's an extremely dark story. So excellent job. Excellent
Thank
job.
you. Thank
So
you.
Yes, and I love that some of the best horror writers are friendly, happy, and cheerful folks because we
Oh my
get all
God.
that stuff out, right?
The horror writers, there's nothing against anybody, any other writers I've ever met, but I swear to God, the horror people are the nicest people. Honestly, you guys have been so wonderful and welcoming and excited to help me get my work out there. And you guys are
Yeah,
terrific.
I think because we all get that dark stuff out on the
That's
page
right.
instead of letting it ferment. Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
thank you so much, Randy. We're going to ask you to come back at the end a little bit and tell us what else you have coming up. So,
Sure.
thank you. I appreciate you joining us. So, what I'd like to do now is introduce our next reader, Todd Kiesling. He's a writer and designer of the horrific and strange. His books include Scanlines, The Final Reconciliation, the Monochrome Trilogy, and Devil's Creek, a 2020 Bram Stoker Award finalist for superior achievement in a novel. A pair of his earlier works were recipients of the University of Kentucky's Oswald Research and Creativity Prize for Creative Writing, 2002 and 2005. And his second novel, The Liminal Man, was an Indie Book Award finalist in Horror and Suspense in 2013. He works as a freelance graphic designer under the moniker of Dullington Design Company. I just have to point out this shirt that I'm wearing was one of his designs for one of his book covers. And I just wanted to wear it tonight because I think it's one of my favorite shirts. Um, Pardon me. In 2021, he was the recipient of This Is Horror's Award for Cover Art of the Year for his cover design of Arterial Bloom. And his second novel, The Liminal Man, was an Indie Book Award finalist in Horror and Suspense 2013. He's an active member of the Horror Writers Association and is represented by Italia Gandolfo of Gandolfo, Halen, and Fountain Literary Management. A former Kentucky resident, Kiesling now lives somewhere in the wilds of Pennsylvania with his wife, son, and a quartet of unruly cats. Todd?
Thank you, Carol. I actually am going to be reading from my novel Devil's Creek tonight, as it is seeing a re-release through Cemetery Dance in just a few weeks. So I apologize if those of you who have read this is, old hat for some, but maybe there are a few newbies out there who haven't read my work yet. So the setup for this scene is that we have our main character, Jack, who has discovered his late grandmother's diary. Jack is the survivor of a death cult, one of the few survivors of said death cult, and that's the reason why he's back in town. So I'm going to read this scene, and will probably take me about 10 minutes. So the nightmare is always the same. He's well acquainted with its twists and turns, the vividness of its depiction, the sensory effects hyper-real in the dream space. Sunlight beaming through the passenger window of his grandmother's green Cadillac heats his arm to an uncomfortable degree, so much the skin reddens in the morning light. Summers in Stafford are always sweltering, a haven for flies and mosquitoes, the trees drooping in depression. Outside, a forest passes them by in a swirling green haze, and the floor beneath his tiny feet rattle from gravel, kicking and spitting up in the wheel well. He can't remember his age, but guesses he's somewhat between 4 and 6 years old. He's dressed in dark leather sandals, neatly pressed khakis, and a green checkered button-down. Without looking, he knows his hair is slicked back and parted to the side. Mama Jeannie drives in silence, leading them along a forest path in the morning sun. Her hair is pristine, a silvery dome coiffed and immaculately sculpted into a perfect bouffant by the finest artists at Arlene's beauty shop. She wears her favorite earrings, a pair of dangling butterflies adorned with emerald jewels, a gift from her late husband. Jack remembers, although he can't recall his grandfather's face. He died in a car accident when Jack was a baby. The nightmare shifts here. A rapid jump cut to a different scene. One projector switched out for another. Mama Genie holds his hand and leads him into the forest. The path is overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. Stones older than time lay embedded in the earth, covered in patches of moss and etched with crude symbols. Deeper into the forest, the world is a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, the sun filtering through the trees in a shadow box display. Mama Genie leads him down a small slope into a gully overgrown with ferns and dandelions. A creek slices through the gully in an erratic line, its waters babbling over stones and under deadfalls. Birds chirp overhead, and the trees whisper about this pair of visitors wandering beneath their branches. Jack stops at the wooden footbridge and tugs on his grandmother's hand. Why do they call it Devil's Creek, Mama? This is the only detail of his nightmare that changes. Imogene Tremley turns to him, and sometimes she's smiling, sometimes she's laughing, sometimes she's crying. Sometimes, like this time, she doesn't have an expression, her lips a single thin line across her face. The water split up ahead, she says, pointing out toward the forest, which now seems so dense it's like a thick green curtain draped over the world. They split off like the Devil's Pitchfork, so old-timers called it Devil's Creek. But we both know there ain't no devil. Ain't that right, honey? No, ma'am. They continue deeper into the forest, where a village of shacks is being constructed. Tools and supplies strewn about the foliage, hammers and saws and nails and beams of lumber and sheet metal, a town grown from the old stones of the earth beneath them. The village smells of rotted meat, and Jack understands why as they near the clearing. Animal carcasses hang from the limbs of trees at the foot of the clearing, odd sacrifices lifted to the sky and offering to gods Jack can't pronounce with his elementary tongue. Flies swarm around the rotting limbs in thick black clouds, and Jack's stomach churns as the stench hits him. He vomits a breakfast of milk and cereal all over his shoes, and Mama Genie scolds him for getting his clothes dirty on their way to church. Another shift in scene. Another projector reel swapped out, and they're at the summit of Calvary Hill. The Lord's Church of Holy Voices stands before them, and the lilting sound of the choir seeps through the old white beams. Mama Genie runs her fingers through Jack's hair until she's satisfied with how it looks. She takes his hand once more. Now, she says, be quiet. We're late for the invocation. She opens the door and leads him into the single room of the old church. The pews are shoved back against the perimeter walls, and motes of dust dance in the beams of morning light, piercing through the windows. Straight ahead, the lectern lies on its side, and the upright piano sits against the wall, forever out of tune. The room is vacant, except for the sounds of the humming choir rising from a hole in the floor. Mama Genie leads Jack to the edge of the hole, where they peer into the depths. There's a light down there. Flickering orange flames fill the cavern with shadows, and Jack resists his grandmother's pull. We're late, she whispers, and releases his hand to descend the ladder before them. He watches her, helpless as she sinks into the shadows, and in a moment of terror, Jack considers fleeing for the door. Jackie, his grandmother whispers, are you coming? His cheeks flush with shame. He doesn't want to let her down, doesn't want to earn her scorn, and descends into the dark. The reel changes again, and they're in an open cavern far below the foundation of the church. Dome-like, insulated in the depths of Calvary Hill, the cavern walls are lined with cracked stone plates upon which are carved symbols that hurt Jack's eyes when he looks at them. A pillar of earth rises from one end, circled with steps carved from stone. The center of the cavern is lit with torches positioned around the perimeter, illuminating mounds of dust and bones. In the infinite wisdom of dream logic, Jack knows there are countless bones buried beneath their feet if they would only dig a little further. And he scrapes the heel of his foot in the dirt. A gray jawbone protrudes from the dirt, its baby teeth caked in dark soil and worms. "Hello," it says. "Won't you join me?" Jack turns away, frightened by the sight, but he finds no respite here in the cavern. The members of his grandmother's church sit in the center, their bodies pressed closely to one another, swaying in time with their singing. White shrouds are draped over their faces, obscuring their eyes and noses, so Jack can only see their mouths. The song they sing is one he has never heard before, a hymn of the old ways written upon the walls, and their voices form a vacuous hum that drones on in his ears until he fears his head might pop. Mamaw Genie joins the circle, joins their mechanical swaying, and leaves him in the flickering shadows near the edge of the room. His father stands outside the circle, beyond a stone altar etched with the same bizarre symbols. A low droning hum erupts from the figure as he lifts his hands to the dark, offering praise to something Jack cannot see but can feel. This unseen thing, this impossible something, it feels gigantic in his dream, a shapeless form that defies logic and wields its own gravity. A giant of dark matter, a self-contained void, hanging above them all, lording over its congregation like the vastness of space. Jack can't bring himself to follow the direction of his father's praising hands. Shaking, Jack taps his grandmother's shoulder. "Please," he whispers. "I'm scared. Can we please go?" Imogene Tremley is annoyed, but her face softens when she sees the terror on his face. "Okay," she says. The congregation sings and sways while their pastor reaches for the unseen, a sentient cosmos deep within the earth. Before they ascend the ladder, Jack looks back at his father, a faceless man he will never understand and never love, a figure of fear and mystery that will haunt him into adulthood. Jacob Masters turns away from the void and casts a darkening gaze upon them. "Sister Tremley," he rasps, "where are you taking my son?" The reels swap one final time, the scene shifting from the dark of the cavern below to the golden sun-filled church above. Jack stands at the threshold, peering down the path along the side of Calvary Hill. Behind him, Mamaw Genie waits at the edge of the hole. She's panicked and afraid, and she beckons to her grandson. "Go," she tells him. "Run, Jackie, for God's sake, run!" And Jackie does as she commands, sprinting from the doorway and into the failing sunlight. Time has ceased to have meaning. The rules broken in this terrible dreamscape, and in the moments they spent underground, an entire day has passed them by. The sun is setting, clouds rolling by overhead, obscuring the light and bleeding the world of warmth. Behind him, something is approaching. Something dark. Something wearing the face of his father and the skin of a man with terrible blue eyes. Something hidden. Something horribly old. Jack runs as fast as his little legs will take him. But no matter how many times he dreams, no matter how far he pushes himself, he never outruns the thing lurking behind him. He never sees it, never gazes upon its vastness, only senses its size, a terrible dark wave seeping from the earth beneath the foundation of the old church. This impossible, formless thing, this unescapable void. It crashes over the threshold, spilling over everything in its wake, swallowing the world as it swallows minds and souls. The void licks at his heels, and he cries out in horror. It sweeps over him. Jack screams. And if you want to find out what happens next, Devil's Creek launches from Cemetery Dance on January 10th. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd. That was chilling.
Thank you.
Wonderful reading. I am super happy that the book is coming back into print with Cemetery Dance. I'm a bit of a what's that?
Me too.
You are too? I'm sure. Yeah. I enjoy the publishing minutia and ins and outs as much as I do the writing part of this whole thing. And I remember reading Devil's Creek. You sent me an advanced copy, and I think it was. I know there's several iterations of the book, because I think the copy that I had a quote that you wound up pulling out as an epigraph from Salem's Lot, I think.
Yeah, I originally had an epigraph for from Salem's Lot, just talking about the nature of evil in a small town. And I originally took it out because I couldn't get, I mean, I will say that the publisher wanted to charge me money per like so many copies per region of the world to reprint. I think it was like 2 sentences.
Yeah, it's just the publisher of Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this time around with Cemetery Dance, I decided to say fuck it. I put it back in.
Yeah, and then the book came out, and it went through a recent transition, and it's coming back to Cemetery Dance. And is it the same edition? Would you call it? Have you made changes? Is there anything in the Cemetery Dance edition?
Aside from some minor copy edits, no, the content is the same. It does have a new introduction by Ronald Malfi. I also wrote a little bit more in the acknowledgments, revised that. And for the most part, it is the same textually. It is different design-wise because I was basically given carte blanche to design it how I wanted to. And I wasn't limited to a word count, or excuse me, a page count. So I was basically able to re-envision the book so it's designed in a way that as the growing corruption in Stafford, Kentucky grows, you can see it spreading across the pages as you read. So with each part of the book, it gradually becomes more and more diseased looking.
That's great. But that's the perfect segue for the question I wanted to ask you is you do a lot of design work, cover design, interior design. Do you find that it influences your writing at all, your design sensibility, or when you're writing that you see how this will actually appear in its final form on the page, or does that influence how you tell a story?
I mean, I've always been a visual person. So whenever I've, I mean, I've been writing my whole life, but whenever I would write and tell a story, I already see it up here. And it's similar to watching a movie. And I'm sure that every writer out there can attest to that. It's like seeing the movie for something that hasn't been created yet. So to that respect, I mean, it helps having that image in my head when I go and create. If I'm doing work for my, cover work or design work for my own stuff, it absolutely is a boon in that regard.
Have you ever gone back and made a change in the story based on what you created in terms of design?
Let me think about this. I mean,
I like to ask the easy questions.
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of a time when I have, but I'm sure there has been. Like even the original edition of Devil's Creek had a lot of sketches and stuff that I included, and there were times when I would get stuck right when I was writing the original draft, but I still had it rolling around in my head, so I would basically shift gears and be creative visually instead of verbally. So that's how a lot of those sketches came to be. I mean, the sketch of the idol, which my friend Tony Rapino actually cast and molded
Oh, wow.
and as a sculpture for me. This I sketched that because I was stuck on writing a scene, and I typically try to write chronologically. So, I was messing with my ADHD to try and write out a sequence. So, instead I drew that.
Cool. Yeah, sometimes it helps to change gears and kind
It
of
does.
refocus the
It
creative
really
energy
does.
for a while. We do have a question from Nicholas Dyack. And Nick would like to know if there's any era of promotional art that you really dig. Book covers of the 80s, movie posters of the 50s, and so on.
I like, movie posters of the 50s are pretty cool. I mean, movie posters throughout are pretty interesting depending on what genre you're looking at. I mean, you've got like the exploitation films of the 70s, 60s and 70s. That type of collage, almost like what's the word I'm looking for? We'll go with collage. It's like a collage of different images. I also like the really minimal promotional art. Book covers of the 80s, I mean, they're fantastic for how ridiculous they are. I mean, Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks Are Hell. I mean, that's such an amazing resource just to go and look at, some of the ridiculous stuff that was getting published cover wise. I also really dig the work of a cover artist by the name of Chip Kidd. What I learned design wise, I learned from him, and just following his career and following his work. Anytime I'm stuck on a design, I go and look at what he did and does continually.
He's done a fair amount of work in comics too, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, he designed. I forget what iteration of Batman and Superman because I stopped following comics a long time ago. But he did design like the cover, like their logos.
Okay.
This particular run of comics. He's done a bunch of covers about with Batman, books about Batman. He's a huge comic nerd.
That's great. And I think I have one more question that I'm wondering about. I know you're a fan of Robert Chambers.
Yes.
The Yellow Sign stories, and Devil's Creek read for me. It was one of the first times I'd read a horror novel in recent years that felt like when I was first reading big horror novels in the 80s. It captured that for me, it captured that scope, that immersion in the world that I discovered first in authors like Stephen King and Robert McCammon and things like that. Is there a particular era of horror that you sort of look to as for inspiration, or the era of horror that really locked in your interest in the genre or your love of the genre?
I mean, I grew up with horror. My earliest memories are of watching horror films with my mom, and she always had a stack of horror novels on her nightstand. I mean, so Stephen King was a household name. Like, I never met the guy, but he was a person that I was aware of from at a very early age. So to answer your question, I have to say that the 80s, of course, I always have a soft spot for that era of horror. Some of the 90s, probably earlier 90s. These days it's a little bit, can be hit or miss. I mean, everything's hit or miss, mostly, but 80s and 90s, it's kind of like that was my first, my first exposure to the genre and the works and the creators. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I guess my question wasn't that well phrased, but that did answer my question. Yeah. So it feels like, that was the era that really kind of tainted your soul
I mean,
forever as a horror writer?
when it came to Devil's Creek, I mean, I wanted to take the tenets of a small town horror novel and bring that into the 21st century. And I wanted to, bring the cosmic horror elements into it, but not make it set in New England like most cosmic horror, classic cosmic horror anyway, is set. No offense to, to you or Doug Wynn or anybody else who writes cosmic horror in New England.
I don't. My cosmic horror tends to be set in New York or on Long Island, so I avoid New England too, but just by a hair. But it's interesting because the small town horror novel is really kind of you'd think that would be at the roots of horror, but it really seems to have been something that developed in the 70s and 80s. I'm thinking of Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon and Salem's Lot by Stephen King, of course, really kind of launched it into the genre fixture that it has become.
Yeah. I mean, Salem's Lot was, I haven't read Harvest Home. I have it. I just haven't gotten to it. I know. Bad horror author. But, Salem's Lot was a big inspiration behind the book. I went to Salem's Lot. I revisited it. And I went to the book. I didn't go to actual Salem's Lot. That place doesn't exist. At least I hope
I was going to ask for directions.
Yeah, no kidding. I returned to the book just to kind of study it. I wanted to see how Stephen King built a town and created this town as a character, and how did he deal with all these ancillary characters that aren't really driving the plot forward per se. They just exist in this sandbox, and how is he looping them in without making them the focus?
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally, took inspiration from that. It was my guidebook, essentially.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for reading from it for us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Have you back on a little bit later to talk about, obviously we've already talked about Devil's Creek, but I'm sure you have some other things coming up we can talk about.
Yeah.
And we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you, Todd.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Coming up next to read are Leanna Renee Hieber and Andrea Janes. Leanna is an actress, playwright, ghost tour guide, and the award-winning author of over 14 Gothic Gaslamp Fantasy novels, such as The Strangely Beautiful, Eterna Files, and Spectral City series. A regular speaker at Sci-Fi fantasy conventions, she's appeared on film and television on shows including Mysteries at the Museum and Beyond the Unknown. She's a 3-time Prism Award-winner for her debut Strangely Beautiful series and a Daphne Du Maurier Award-finalist for Darker Still. After earning a BFA in theater, performance, and a focused study in the Victorian era, she spent many years in the professional regional theater circuit, skills that serve her well as a speaker and a ghost tour guide for Boroughs of the Dead in New York. Leanna lives in New York and can be found online at leannareneehieber.com. Andrea Janes is the founder and owner of Boroughs of the Dead, New York City's premier ghost tour company, which has been featured on NPR.org, the New York Times, Jezebel, Today, the Huffington Post, Gothamist, the Travel Channel, Condé Nast Traveler, Mashable, and more. Andrea is also the author of the YA novel Glamour and the horror collection Boroughs of the Dead, the inspiration for her company. To find out more, you can visit boroughsofthedead.com. Please welcome Leanna and Andrea.
Hello. Very cool to see our book dripping with blood. It's pretty epic.
Blood on our book for sure.
Pretty epic. So, hi, yes, we're here together because we co-authored this book. So, A Haunted History of Invisible Women is one part ghost story, one part women's history, and a lot of commentary about the social issues that are at the intersection of women's history and ghost stories. And so which one of us wants to go first, Andrea?
You can go ahead.
All right. So let me just sort of set up how this book is structured really quickly, because we thanks to our brilliant editor at Kensington, this book is structured in tropes. It's different sections. So we have 7 different sections, and it starts with Death and the Maiden, and then it continues on with witches, of course, in quotes, because the people who were executed for witchcraft weren't actually witches. Mothers and Wives is part 3. Bad Girls, Jezebels, and Killer Women is part 4. And Mad Women also, of course, in quotes, because most often they're not, in fact. Part 6, Spinsters and Widows. And part 7, Frauds, Fakes, and Myth-Making. And it is into these sections that we have, we offer real history, real women, and their real ghost stories. So I've trimmed a very short chapter of mine to fit in the time here, called Forever Maritana, and it is in our Death and the Maiden section, which posits the complications of beautiful women dying young. St. Petersburg Beach, Florida. Come, all ye who seek health and rest, for here they are abundant. This is the quote originally above the entrance to the legendary Pink Palace, the Don Cesar Hotel in Florida. A massive pink hotel in a Moorish style. It's design based predominantly on the Royal Hawaiian in Waikiki. The building is a character in and of itself. Known fondly as the Pink Lady, the 300-room hotel is an enormous labor of love, completed in 1928, built to honor a star-crossed passion. Orphaned at the age of 4, Thomas Roe was sent from his birthplace of Boston, Massachusetts, to his grandfather in Ireland. Educated in London, at some point in the 1890s, he attended a performance of Maritana, a light opera. The hero of the production is Don Cesar, a gallant man whose series of misfortunes are turned around by those who care for and admire him. Maritana is a 3-act opera. The first time Thomas Roe saw an 1890s revival of Maritana in London, he fell madly in love with a leading lady, an actress named Lucinda. A young Spanish soprano with long, dark curls and mesmerizing eyes, Lucinda played the titular role of Maritana, a Roma, street singer, and dancer. The opera's plot twists and turns, but finally, the titular heroine and the famed Don Cesar emerge triumphant lovers, a rare operatic happy ending. Thomas Roe went back to see Maritana night after night. Eventually, he met the star and managed to win her love. They would rendezvous after the show by a secluded fountain courtyard they called their secret garden. As if it were a side plot in another opera, the two planned their escape together when the run of the show was complete. But on that fateful night, she never appeared at their secret garden. Lucinda's parents intervened and whisked her back to Spain. Life did not imitate art. A heartbroken young man moved to Virginia and began a career in real estate. He did marry, but unhappily. It wasn't long before Roe and his wife Mary were estranged. Poor health, a heart condition, and asthma had Roe moving to Florida for better weather and a new real estate prospect. Roe wrote Lucinda countless letters over the years, all returned unopened. A note arrived in the early days of the 20th century along with an obituary. In her final moments, Lucinda reportedly wrote him a letter asking for forgiveness. I wait for you by our fountain to share our timeless love. Our destiny is time. Forever Maritana. Roe was going to rebuild that fountain, their secret garden, as if it were a summoning spell, determined to evoke her spirit. And it worked. Roe, managing to overcome his poor health, had a vision for the Don Cesar Hotel when others thought it was madness. By the time of its January 1928 completion, the Pink Lady had cost $1.5 million, 3 times its original budget. That is more than $24 million today. Thomas Roe recreated his and Lucinda's secret garden fountain exactly as he remembered it. It would serve as the hotel lobby, courtyard, and fountain, the first impression of the Pink Palace, fashioning a familiar and sacred place for Lucinda's spirit to find him. Having lived in the hotel since its opening, Roe later died in the hotel, refusing to be taken to the hospital. Emergency equipment was brought into his ground floor rooms. He was a man unable to be separated from his monument. After his death, a man in his signature white suit and hat was often seen promenading about the premises, a dark-haired lady on his arm. One of the hotel's former executives had a direct experience with Thomas and Lucinda. He heard them in his office. And here we quote, "The moment he turned the key in the lock, the voices ceased. With a trembling hand, he opened the door, And he later said, I actually heard them leave. I could hear every step she made. I could even hear the crinoline on her skirt rustling. Every pore on my body had the goosebumps. It was bizarre. When he walked into his office, it was totally empty. Perhaps the sentimental operatic backstory of the hotel attracts phantom lovers. Some of F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald's last happy moments were spent at the Don Cesar. Their infamous, complex, sometimes volatile relationship was the subject of intense fascination within their own lifetimes, continuing to this day. Shortly after their visit to the Don Cesar, Zelda's mental health deteriorated and she was eventually institutionalized, where she later died in a horrific fire. The ghostly jazz-age couple seen dancing in the courtyard and ballroom spaces of the Don Cesar are not of Thomas and Lucinda's era or dress. It must be Scott and Zelda. Surely, sentiment would lead one to believe they have been reunited, all horrors, trauma, and pain healed by time. Perhaps come all ye who seek health and rest, for here they are abundant over the door, was a magical spell drawing in those beyond the veil who needed it. Yet we know so little of Lucinda as a person. She was idealized then and now, never a full person or a complete name. An opera formed her and Thomas Rowe's understanding of each other. Certainly the performer and her beau knew truth from fiction, but they still used character names for each other long after the stage lights had dimmed. The building erected in honor of that opera's happy ending holds those character names, not their given ones. Built as a tribute to his lost love is the only mention or reference Lucinda gets on the main pages of the Don Cesar Hotel's official website. She's the raison d'etre of the building, but to get more than a footnote in their named history, you have to sift and search to find a brief mention of Thomas and Lucinda and their star-crossed history in one of the hotel's blog entries, The Haunted Ghosts of the Don Cesar. The Don Cesar, whose lobby, courtyard, and fountain are an exact replica of the one where Thomas and Lucinda rendezvous in London, is Thomas's tribute to his lost love. Since his passing, staff and guests reported otherworldly sightings of a gentleman sporting an old-fashioned Panama hat and white summer suit, strolling the grounds and even greeting guests, yet when he is approached, he disappears. Hotel staffers report strange happenings throughout the hotel and especially on the floor where Thomas lived. Housekeepers hear mysterious knockings at doors while cleaning rooms, yet find no one there. Swinging doors open by themselves to accommodate staffers laden with trays, perhaps Thomas still helping his team as the gracious hotelier he was. To this day, sightings continue of a young couple strolling the grounds wearing a white suit and traditional Spanish peasant dress. The entry urges readers to come stay at the Don Cesar to see if the ghost stories are true. A lovelorn ghost story has become a part of hotel advertising. Lucinda's family name doesn't turn up in any of these accounts, just her first name. Denied agency and choice by her parents in life, she is denied full personhood, even in her own ghost story. She is merely an idea of a woman, a coveted but still unknown thing, lifted up into that romanticized and saintly place reserved for the concept of beautiful women who die young. Forever, Maritana.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to take us into like a whole new territory.
Mm-hmm.
I will be reading from our section about, quote, witches.
Yay.
Section about witches with no actual witches in it, because I'm going to be reading the Bell Witch story, and I think most people are pretty familiar with it, but I have titled this chapter, Our Family Trouble, named after Richard Bell's own account. Richard Bell was the son of the Bell family, who was 6 years old at the time of the family troubles. Before I start in on this, I just want to give a little bit of a content warning. There is some abuse in this story and sexual abuse in this story. So please just, if that's something you don't want to listen to, step away for about 10 minutes or so. So just to begin with, at the beginning, in 1817 in Adams, Tennessee, a supernatural entity tormented a farmer named John Bell and his family. The haunting centered mainly on John and the family's pretty pubescent daughter, Betsy. An entity who called herself Kate tormented the girl, slapping and scratching her, pulling her hair, and otherwise afflicting her. John Bell, in his account of this, Our Family Trouble, Richard Bell, variously refers to this entity as a goblin or spirit, and numerous other terms, even at times calling it the wizard or warlock, the seer, and the mage. At one point, he refers to it as the invisible. His use of language in terms of naming the entity is the vocabulary of someone groping in the dark. This is a man struggling to name something for which he has no words. Part of this is very likely the reason because the term poltergeist had not yet entered the popular American lexicon when Bell ostensibly penned his account. The term poltergeist didn't come into the English vocabulary until 1848, when a woman in England named Catherine Crowe wrote about it in her very first ghost hunting manual ever, The Night Side of Nature. But to modern readers, this entity in the Bell Witch, who throws, punches, kicks, slaps, howls, whistles, laughs, and pulls bed sheets, is instantly recognizable as a poltergeist. A very famous psychical researcher, very famous old school psychical researcher called Nandor Fodor, included the tale of the Bell Witch under the heading of poltergeist, and it was there that he classifies this story. Fodor's great contribution to the Bell Witch canon was to suggest one possible theory behind the haunting, namely the theory that Betsy was allegedly sexually abused by her father in childhood, and the onset of puberty triggered a trauma-based response. Now, there's a lot of pushback on the obvious Freudian interpretations underpinning the Bell Witch case, mainly from people who hated the American Haunting movie. But what I found really fascinating about this case are the implications here about teenage girls, abuse, and power that manifests in the cases of poltergeists, as well as multiple personality disorders, the link between psychic abilities, trauma, and telekinesis, all of which are demonstrated in the Bell Witch case as it is currently documented. So according to Fodor, he was the first to posit that Betsy's psychic split was a subconscious defense mechanism, and that her hatred of her father could only be expressed if sublimated through the entity of Kate, who allowed her to lash out. Poltergeists have always been allied with a female from the earliest days. An 18-year-old nun named Antoinette de Grollet was haunted at Saint-Pierre-en-Lyon in France in 1526, enduring levitations and rappings. Sounds like the Fox sisters, the rappings. These supposedly supernatural manifestations seem like a natural outgrowth of woman's innately terrifying power. Teenage girls with their particularly intense maelstrom of hormones, sex, and raw emotion are associated with poltergeist activity. Fodor's psychologically based theories of the poltergeist were virulently rejected by his fellow psychical researchers. Remember, this is in the early 20th century, early to mid 20th century. But they eventually gained a foothold in later 20th century parapsychology. Psi researchers now acknowledge the likelihood of the connection between adolescent emotional states and the telekinetic phenomena witnessed during poltergeist events. They now accept that these occurrences may be the result of a troubled mind less than a disembodied spirit entity. The current preferred term for the poltergeist in the world of all things psi is RSPK, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. One well-known, fairly contemporary case of RSPK is that of Tina Resch. In Columbus, Ohio, in 1984, 15-year-old Tina was plagued by poltergeist-like activity, including levitating objects. She was from a troubled home with histories of mental illness and abuse. William Roll, a parapsychologist at the Rhine Research Center, then located at Duke University in North Carolina, championed Tina's case, defending her against charges of fakery and writing a book about her called Unleashed. William Roll's sensitive handling of Resch's case underlies one important factor that many poltergeist stories have in common. They often center on teenage girls in less than ideal family situations. Though these girls are often accused of fraud, they don't really benefit materially from all the attention their poltergeists bring them. They are not calculatedly vying for attention or wealth. Their manifestations of RSPK are desperate acts born of haunted minds. They're screaming for help the only way they can. Few people are denied agency as much as a teenage girl. She's dismissed, belittled, cut down to size at every turn. Her pleas for help are derided as attention-seeking. Cutting, eating disorders, and other types of self-harm are some of the more earthbound cries for help. And at the other extreme end of the spectrum dwells the poltergeist. When this world robs them of power, teenage girls may slip over to the spirit world for aid, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes deliberately. A powerless teenage girl may turn her pain inward. Anorexia mirabilis, or mystical fasting, has been another way for teenage girls to achieve a sense of control, perform self-inflicted punishment, and to cry out. The fasting girls of the 19th century often laid claim to psychic powers. Fasting girls would starve themselves, in part to achieve psychic powers and in part to remain unattractive to men. Modern rape victims often develop eating disorders, from anorexia to overeating. One analysis of 57,000 women found that those who experienced physical or sexual abuse were twice as likely to be addicted to food. In the case of these fasting girls, you can consider them the secular descendants of saints and mystics, such as Catherine of Siena, who notoriously starved themselves to achieve heavenly visions and to make themselves unappealing. They were untouchable and unearthly, removed from the material and bodily world that denied them power over their own bodies and minds. There's a vast body of literature about teen girls and RSPK, particularly as it relates to trauma and revenge. Betsy Bell fits squarely into this pattern, the spiritual foremother of Stephen King's Carrie White. The vengeful telekinetic girl is a trope in horror movies as well, from Firestarter to Lucy, The Lazarus Effect, The Fury, and Thelma. The girls react to being bullied, abused, and undermined. They were not born monsters, but made that way by worlds that demanded they be dominated until their denied, repressed power becomes explosive. Rage is an emotion women are typically forbidden to express, and it is repressed until it becomes unleashed in ways that seem supernatural to those who cannot fathom how it feels to be so violated. Many have argued that any poltergeist activity centered around a teenage girl necessarily involves deception and fakery. All theories are plausible. Whether Betsy Bell suffered torment at the hands of a genuine spirit or merely the torment of a fractured mind doesn't make a difference if the end result was still torment. The incredible manifestations supposedly witnessed at the Bell farmhouse certainly make one wonder how a teenage girl could have ever pulled these things off. The witch was highly loquacious, meaning Betsy would have had to become very adept at throwing her voice. But according to Richard Bell's account, the spirit became audible by degrees, beginning at first as whistles and growls, and gradually working its way up to speech. These are exactly the techniques used in learning how to throw the voice. Perhaps Betsy figured it out for herself. There's a lot about words and a lot about speaking in Richard Bell's account. And yes, the word poltergeist, much less telekinesis, wouldn't have been available in Bell's vocabulary, which is in part why he seems to be groping for something to call it. The other reason he can't seem to find the words to name this phenomenon, besides the fact that words like telekinesis didn't exist, is this. If Photo's theory is correct, what happened to Betsy is unspeakable. At one point, John Bell is tortured by the feeling of an invisible stick wedged in his mouth, preventing him from speaking or eating for days. He's rendered mute by this bizarre apparatus. At another point, Kate sings a hymn to the mother Lucy when she is ill, and the lyrics of the hymn reference a longing to speak. The words are, "Speak and let the worst be known. Speaking may relieve you." Both John and Betsy seem desperate to reveal some secret, but are of course prevented by the deeply repressive culture of the day and the profundity of the sins allegedly committed against Betsy. John's longing to break his silence suggests a feeling of profound guilt. He is the keeper of the dark secret, their family trouble, keeps it locked deeply away. In the first half of the 19th century, were a world where the word psychology was unknown, but where victimization and trauma were certainly real for many young girls. It seems inevitable that poltergeists would be one outlet for a shattered mind. Where Fodor suggests that Kate was able to salvage Betsy's fractured psyche, enabling her to live to a ripe old age, well, this brings us back to the witch. In this context, the witch was the spirit of a living embodied person, a woman named Kate Batts. This second self, this split self, is the one that floats freely while the body remains in place, a common motif among rape victims. The witch is a spiritual cousin of the telekinetic teen girl, taking back her agency to avenge her wronged self. We can see so many points of contact between the two, the witch and the poltergeist, in this case of Betsy Bell's, where psychokinesis is prompted by a sexualized adolescent emergence, a nucleus of fear and power, in cases of witches and poltergeists alike. For better or worse, whether persecuted for it or celebrated, the witch was and always has been a woman with power. Without Kate, photo surmises, Betsy may have ended up in a madhouse. How many other girls have that outlet? How many of these saints and fasting girls and witches and poltergeists victims were in fact traumatized girls lashing out? How many cases of telekinesis have been triggered by trauma? Where does the pain and rage go when there is no earthly outlet for it? To visions, to psychic manifestations, to screams, to shattered glass. These are not the demons of hell. They are our own demons. These are not ghosts and spirits from another world. They are fierce, troubled, raging spirits, knocking and rapping and howling and desperate to scream, to speak, to reveal, and to be heard. We ended on the fun one, didn't we? It's really hard to abridge your own work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow, that was really exciting. I have to say, well, first of all, what I'd love for you guys to do is tell us just briefly how the ghost tours work, so that people understand what the framework was of bringing this up in your minds. Andrea, it's your company, and you have several tour people. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we have several guides, and we're all very free form about the way we do it. It's unscripted. So, we have a story with the basic sort of facts of the story, and then we retell them in the ways that appeal to us most. And I think that's how Leanna and I approach the book as well. So there's this kind of set text that everybody knows and is, easy to find out. There's no revelations there. But I think the analysis and the interpretation and sort of the way we emphasize certain angles of the story. I mean, the Bell Witch story can be told hundreds of ways. And it's such a famous story. It's such a rich text. So I just kind of approached it from this one particular angle, which is something that fascinates me specifically, because I'm really kind of obsessed with the idea of fasting girls. I read about Nandor Fodor ages ago. I read On the Trail of the Poltergeist ages ago. And I was just really interested in this idea that, and he was the first person to come up with any kind of link between trauma and RSPK. And when I read the John Bell, I keep calling him John, the Richard Bell account, Our Family Trouble, and there's like a lot of allegations of fraud throughout the whole thing. The text by Martin Van Buren Ingram, a newspaper editor who wrote the whole story, he included in one chapter Richard Bell's account. So I read specifically that chapter because if it is by a living witness to the case, even if he was a young boy at the time, then that would be, I think, the most accurate portrayal of it. Now, it may not be real at all. We don't really know. But, a lot of this subconscious vocabulary that he was using, all these references to speaking, to silence, to speaking out, and to kind of like unburdening oneself. I was just like, from a sort of a therapy perspective, I was like, this is very telling. So I found Fodor's theory very believable. And there's like a lot more to it. I had to like cut half the chapter out to make it in time. But just that link between the rage, the power, the trauma, and the manifestation, and that sort of point of contact between the witch and the poltergeist, this like strange sort of power, and women have been vilified for having. In this case, it was a kind of the only recourse this young girl had. She wasn't the witch; she was tormented by a witch, but it was like this sort of connective tissue between those two concepts that I thought was really fascinating.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leanna.
Just in terms of like just bringing it back to the book as a whole, just the concept of wanting to make sure that we are approaching this with foremost respect for the dead, And then these intersections of where women's issues do come up in terms of these various ghostly details. And so we just, both of us, either way, whether we're walking across the streets of New York and telling them real history, and here are the people involved, respect is at that is at the forefront. But then also, like, what is it striking to us as the guides? It has to be coming from our personal interests and our angle. So for this, the ghosts we chose, I mean, obviously this is not a huge compendium. This is a book that's yay big. It's not a comprehensive book of every women's ghost story that's out there. It's the ones that specifically really truly called to us and that fit within the structure of the 7 themes that we use as the tropes, as the different sections, as a way to structure this, because it isn't about one specific region, and it isn't about one specific type of haunting. It's about the range of human experiences. So you see something that's a little bit sweeter and a little bit more fond and a little bit more sentimental in, say, Forever Maritana, and then you've got this really, really dark and heavy stuff like with the Bell Witch. So we really wanted to make sure that we were not presenting just doom and gloom, because women's history has a lot of harmful aspects that is in it, and a lot of trauma and a lot of difficult subject matter, but there's also beauty and joy as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to comment on the Bell Witch in particular. I mean, that's one that I thought I knew, and I've read about that account, nonfiction accounts of it. A novel, at least one novel, possibly 2 I've read that were based on it, and seen movies based on it. And you brought something completely new to the case in your interpretation of it, your investigation of it. I think that's amazing. It says tremendous amount about what ghost stories really mean, or what they can mean, and how personal they can be, even years later, which is just it's really cool, I think, is what I'm getting at. But we did an event a few days ago where we had to, for the first time as part of this event, I had to tell a ghost story sort of off the cuff. And I have a brand new respect for everyone who can just tell a good ghost story off the cuff. So
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's great.
And just to share, we each told stories, and several of other author friends, and we had Gordon Linsner, one of your tour guides. We brought him and put him last because we knew he could do a bang up finale for us. So, and he did. Yeah. So one of the things I was struck by in looking through the front part of the book and such are some of the comments that you made about it's many women who are interested in taking ghost tours, and many of these ghosts and visitations seem to be female. And I was struck by the comment you made about it was one way for women to have agency that they did not have in their life. And I thought that was really striking. That's a really interesting point. Any thoughts about that? I mean, how did that?
It just occurred to me that when you are a ghost, nothing can kill you anymore. So the worst has already happened to you. And that's very freeing. Like, when you have these moments in your life where your worst fear is actualized and comes true, the initial response is horror, followed by this incredible sense of freedom where you're just like, oh, it didn't kill me. So this is one step even further. You're like, I literally cannot be destroyed at this point. Now, if perhaps you believe in exorcisms, maybe, but these ghosts have not been exorcised. And many of them remain staunchly, here in our subconscious minds forever and always. And it's really like, it's a pretty sweet revenge, honestly.
Yeah. Like, what are you going to do to me, huh?
I cannot be destroyed anymore.
and we're still talking about them. A lot of these are women who would not be, still remembered were they not a part of a ghost story. So their names are told. Yeah. Exactly. Their names are still with us, and their houses in many cases. Part of the reason why their houses are still there and can still operate as house museums, whether it's the Merchant's House on 4th Street or the Morse Jamel Mansion or other haunted properties, the Winchester Mystery House would not exist if they hadn't turned it into an amusement, which I go into the fact that the amusement park angle of the Winchester Mystery House is where we get all the falsehoods about Sarah Winchester, who was not, in fact, a madwoman, but a very, very sane lady who happened to like architecture. So it's, but at the same time, we kind of have to at least give it to the Winchester Amusement Company for coming in the year after her death and creating a location, a tourist attraction, so that house is still standing. Otherwise, it would have been torn down. So, you know, that's another way in which, you know, these women's stories are also helping preserve history, because an angle about them in life, whether it was complete falsehoods or whether it is, you know, the lure of their ghost story, keeps people coming back to keep talking about them. So the history becomes contemporaneous.
It's the paradox of the smear job, like when Griswold tried to smear Poe, and look, he just made him more amazing. So,
oh yeah, the backwards.
Yeah.
Right.
We do have a question from our audience, if that's okay. What television shows, in the vein of unsolved mysteries, sightings beyond belief, and so on, do you think do an admirable job at presenting and educating ghost legends and hauntings to folks? Anything come to mind?
If it's presented with respect, I mean, no matter in any of these shows, if the person is respectful, that's great. If you come in and you start yelling at ghosts, I'm out.
That's fair. That applies to anybody, but you know, particularly somebody.
Yeah. So if you're leading with aggression, or feeling like you have something to prove in any given case, then that's not gonna win me, and I don't think it's gonna serve any of these stories well. So I think as long as you've got people who are passionate about the material, it's really hard to separate fact from fiction when you start talking about some of this stuff, because there's a lot of urban legend, sifting through this, and urban legend after a while starts to become truth, and these accounts keep getting retold, and so we're trying to separate fact from fiction, but sometimes we're actually just telling you, here's the fiction, now let's unpack this too. But again, it has to come down to that level of respect.
So in that sense, was this a challenging book to research?
yeah, oh, very much so, because you feel like you're sifting through the weeds all the time. Needle in a haystack, like it's nuts. The amount of BS you have to sift through is absolutely insane. And the amount, there's some sort of like special dispensation that paranormal writers have granted themselves. And you just read all these books and they'll cite one source. Like there's no kind of parameters, like people aren't adhering to, like it's unless
the academic standards. There's
no standards unless you're reading a scholarly article, which is all theory. But like half of the books you read, there's no standards, there's no scholarship. It's nuts. It's just like the Wild West. So people will say anything and they'll cite Wikipedia and they'll print it in a book, and then it just keeps on going and going and going, and it makes you feel like you're going mad.
Oh, they're doing it on purpose.
It was tough for us because we were given the directive, by a very passionate publisher, and we love working with them to have this be a narrative nonfiction that is entertaining and engaging and doesn't read like an academic text, but at the same time, we really did want to apply some academic lenses to this. So we really had to. We honestly were trying to strike a balance. We're trying to strike a happy medium with the book, and have it be an engaging story. Chapter by chapter, separate stories that each have their own, beginning, middle, and end, while still trying to sort of like make sure that you all know that we did in fact look stuff up.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And I think you did an admirable job making it entertaining as well, because watching the people at the rooftop readings this month, Leanna, while you were reading, there was a packed house that was spellbound listening to your story about the New York house, and it's the second time I've heard it. I'm still like, so well done, ladies. Well
thank
done.
Thank you. That was, that's my particular personal horror that you can read about in the unreliable narrator chapter of our book. So that one gets personal.
Yeah.
Excellent. So definitely a good reason to pick up Invisible Women and read the story. The true story.
yes, the real, yes. So a haunted history of invisible women. Invisible Women itself is a great book, but that is about women in the labor force. So this is a haunted history of invisible women is about the haunting force.
My apologies for
saying
the title incorrectly. Yes.
Maybe I'll write a book-length study of the Bell Witch and I'll call it The Invisible. Just
there you go.
Just call it The Inn. Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, terrific. Well, how about if we invite our other authors to come up and, everybody will say boo. No, that's not true.
Welcome back, Randy. And
Randy and
Boo.
Todd,
Yeah.
boo. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us tonight for your wonderful readings. This was really really great stuff, fascinating to listen to, and I think I'm learning a lot tonight, so that's good.
Yeah, and I have so many books that are in the to be read pile that have to get shifted to the top of the to be read pile now. So yeah, I need more ghosts. And Todd, I got to go back. I can't wait to get your new version with the cool graphics. So that'll
Oh,
be really
thank
cool.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. Neat. Well, what are you guys working on? What's coming up next for you guys? How about you, Randy? What do you have in the works? What's coming up? Doing anything fun?
Well, I'm currently writing a story for an upcoming anthology called Jewish Futures. It'll be more of a sci-fi story,
Okay.
which I don't normally write, so this is interesting for me. And one of my stories, Rough Beast Slouching, which came out in Dim Shores Volume 2 in 2021, that was recently named in Ellen Datlow's long list of best horror for 2021. And there will be a reprint of it coming out in Soul Scream, which is a new publication. It was just kind of a combination of an anthology and a magazine that publisher Christopher Ryan is putting together.
And he has dubbed it Antholozine.
Antholozine, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be a collection of short stories and poems featuring female protagonists who use their will, skill, or agency to confront horror. And Rough Beast Slouching, which is one of my horror fantasy stories, is going to be reprinted in that.
Excellent. That's worth seeing again, for sure. Yeah. And how about you, Todd? You're doing graphics work, you said.
Yeah, I'm busy with graphics work for, graphics work for days, weeks, months. I have a new book coming out. Well, besides Devil's Creek, which isn't new, but you know what I mean. My next collection, Cold, Black, and Infinite, Stories of the Horrific and Strange, that comes out in July from Cemetery Dance as well. I have a story that's going to be in the new anthology Never Wake that is edited by Kenneth Kane and Tim Meyer. That's coming out through Crystal Lake sometime next year. I don't know exactly when. And yeah, I've got a book that I just finished editing, so I'm going to start the shopping process for that one.
Cool.
Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very busy. Yeah.
I love the title of the collection, Todd. Sounds like some uplifting beach read.
It's from a Nine Inch Nails song, actually.
Perfect.
Okay, I just have to tell really briefly a silly thing. My husband was the accountant for the manager of Nine Inch Nails, so we got to see them at various times. So
Nice.
Amazing.
Oh wow.
Weird
Amazing.
connection, I know.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So,
Leanna and Andrea, what have you got on the horizon?
We've been shopping this book. this book has been our lives, and so yes, so on a history of invisible women, and we're trying to hopefully, if this book does well, we're putting together a proposal package for the follow-up volume. So book 2, we hope, because there's plenty more ghosts out there, and we would like to tell their stories. So we have an ongoing document where we just keep putting names in. So I am drafting another Gaslamp Fantasy novel. I just have a story that came out in the Castle of Horror Young Adult Anthology. So the Castle of Horror anthology series does different themes. So they have a young adult theme this week. We just released on Tuesday. So I've got a story in that. And I work for scribed.com doing audiobook narration. So I have ongoing novellas that are speculative fiction with some elements of horror. Like I have a ghost who fell in love with an exorcist story. That's a spirit suitor that came out this year. And I've done the audio narration as well as it's out digitally via Scribed, exclusively via that site. So I have an upcoming one about both a steampunk and a dystopian double narrative about a virus that's hits New York City. So this was written pre-pandemic. With this, but it's, like with a lot of my things, it ends on a hopeful note, I promise. So I will be literally after I leave this space, I will be going into my recording closet and recording a chapter for The World of Tomorrow is Sadly Outdated, which will be out next year from Scribed.
okay.
Cool.
I love that title. It's so good.
Yes.
By the way, Dark, Cold, and Infinite is definitely a book I would bring to the beach and read.
Yay!
I knew I liked you. Yeah.
That was my idea of a beach read.
I wasn't joking.
That's serious. No, I love beach noir. It's like it's my fave. So I went through my notebook the other day and I counted 5 unfinished novels, and I don't know. I really don't know. What's next? I'm just going to focus on volume 2 of Haunted History of Invisible Women, and I have this one short story that is a commissioned short story, and I literally, as we were talking, emailed my editor because I completely forgot about it. And it's going to be set at Coney Island, and it'll have shades of the movie Night Tide, and it'll be about mermaids, but it will also be a super sad story about ghost children. So it's going to have everything, I think. Yeah, mermaids.
Great.
Everybody keep us updated on these things. These all sound wonderful. And Andrea, I'm going to pass you the giant cup of coffee so that you can get.
This is like my bedtime. I can't even.
Yeah.
I'm like 9:41. I'm shocked.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
thank you for staying up.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, we
my.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Those stories to keep you up at night.
Yeah. So Jim, what do you? Oh, yeah. You
Yeah.
did well. You did well.
Thanks.
Jim, what are you up to? What's coming up for you?
Good question. I think that I will have a story making an appearance in the same anthologine that Randy mentioned, Soul Scream. It's a story that was originally published in my collection on the Night Border called Some Bitch and the Arachidile. It's quite a mouthful for a title, but and on the immediate horizon, I will have a story in the forthcoming issue of Cemetery Dance, which I'm very excited about.
Congratulations, sir.
Should be out hopefully soon after the new year.
Yeah. Cool. Well, as far as myself, I guess I can say this now because I just signed the contract, but I have a story in this really new anthologine thing. It's an alternate history take on Tom Sawyer, where Aunt Polly has a robot come to visit her, and the name of the story is Automatom. So yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
Once I thought of that, I couldn't avoid it. And I have a few stories that are in the midst and finished editing and coming out. And I have 2 projects that I'm working on. And of course, I can't talk about them, but yes, I just do those while I'm sleeping. Yeah.
Right.
But listen, everybody, this has been so much fun. We've had very different pieces tonight, and I really enjoy that because we get a nice variety of takes and things, and very excited. So we have some interesting things coming up. I'd love for everybody to mark your calendar for our next Galactic Terrors reading, which is on Thursday, January 12th. We're usually the second Thursday of the month in 2023. Oh my gosh, it's the first time I've said that. Again at 8 o'clock. And we've got readers Nathan Carson, Ogunachove Donald Ekpeki, and our HWA Vice President, Megan R. Curry, coming up. So,
there we
are.
January 12th.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2023. Wow.
I refuse to acknowledge 2023.
Well, remember when we used to all write checks? It would take me 2 months before I could write the correct year on the check, and now I don't even have a check to write on anymore.
What's the check?
Yeah, right. It's nothing. Yeah.
Check.
Yeah.
But if you want to be reminded about the next episode, you can sign up for the Galactic Terrors newsletter. And of course, click subscribe below to follow future Galactic Terrors transmissions, or just look for us every second Thursday of the month.
Yes, because that's important, and if you missed any part of this transmission, please, feel free to watch it on YouTube or over on Facebook Live. It's there as well. So there's a clickable link for the newsletter that you can join if you haven't already. So thank you so much. We'll be pulling some names shortly for those who have won a book. So please, if you haven't subscribed, getting on the newsletter is a good way to win a free book. So yeah. All right, everybody.
And Leanna, I just want to say I love your Poe cameo.
Thank you.
I may have bought one like that from her.
He is my reason. Yeah, I do have an Etsy shop. Etsy shop. Yes, the Torch and Arrow on Etsy. Yes, Poe is my reason for the season.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm gonna have to go shop some more. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. So what was it? It was Torch and Arrow.
Torch and Arrow on
Torch
Etsy.
And Arrow. Okay, yeah.
I only have one.
Someone who doesn't
Torch
want
and Arrow. Yeah, I only have one Poe piece left. So
Oh boy. Okay.
I
My
have to
daughter loves
restock, but
Poe too, so.
I've been on deadline, so I haven't been able to do much jewelry because I've been on book tour. So
that
but
makes
thank
it
you.
a
I love
that
him,
makes it a
so.
solo Poe cameo.
Correct.
Oh,
Thank you.
Wah, wah.
okay.
My work
Randy
here
this
is done.
evening.
Okay.
Nicely done.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank you for that, Randy.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to guide us right out, isn't it?
All right. Thank you all
Thanks,
again.
everybody.
This has been a pleasure, and good luck with all of your projects. And we hope to have you back on Galactic Terrors again sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
fun.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Night, everybody.
Bye.